Okay, hello everyone. I can see the participant count on the bottom of the screen growing, so I'm just going to give people a little couple of minutes. We'll start this off in about a minute or so. Wonderful. Okay, I'll start. It's a pleasure having everyone here. I'll introduce myself. My name is Nikki, and I'm the director of the Outsider Art Fair. I'm so happy to be introducing this talk about transgression and taboo in outsider art, an interesting and fascinating topic, and especially with these four people. Before I introduce myself and hand it over to Carlo, I just want to let everyone know that the Outsider Art Fair is open. It runs through till February 7, and the format is a little different this year. So it doesn't matter where you are around the world, you can still experience the fair in some way. So if you're in NYC, we have 7 exhibitions across 5 locations in Manhattan. And if you're not in New York City, you can go online, and we have 45 exceptional viewing rooms for you to look at. So to attend the in-person events, go to our website, book a pass, reserve a time, mask up, go see some great shows. And if you're not, we have some really strong exhibitions online for you to peruse. So all the information can be found at outsiderartfair.com/New York. Okay, quick housekeeping. We think this will go for about this talk will go for about an hour. We want to leave 10-15 minutes for questions at the end. There's a lot of you on this talk, so we will not be able to get to every question. However, there's a Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. So if there is a question, please put it in there. We will try to get to it. We'll be monitoring that during the talk. If I see the question and it relates to what's going on in the conversation, I'll interject, or we can leave it till the end of the talk. We'll see how that goes. And also, this talk is being recorded, so and then it will be on view on the Outsider Art Fair website at a later date. Okay, I want to introduce these panelists. We have, first of all, Marion Harris, an arts and antique dealer who's participated in the fair since 1993, its inception. Such a passion and an eye for collecting. And it was Marion who really over the years brought Morton Bartlett to international acclaim. Next, Joe Coleman, a world-renowned painter, writer, performer, who's been exhibiting and performing for 4 decades all around the world. Emerging from the New York downtown scene in the 70s and 80s, Joe has produced some of the most radical and transgressive performance art of its time. Mondo comes to mind, 1988, captured 2008. Next up, Michael Bonesteel. He's a leading author and authority in the artist Henry Darger. Amongst many other things, he's a writer, a scholar, a curator, and a contributing editor to Raw Vision. Super excited to have him on board. And last but not least, our moderator, Carlo McCormick, a critic and curator based in New York City. Carlo's essays have been included in hundreds of books, and his writings on art and popular culture have been featured in Art Forum, Art in America, hundreds. He was the senior editor of Paper Magazine for over 30 years and a curator as well. So thank you, the 4 of you, for being here. I look forward to this. Carlo, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nikki. And the Outsider Art Fair for hosting us. I'm not sure I'm seeing you primarily, but I guess that's how it goes. I'm not versed on Zoom. Thanks everyone really for joining this talk, and particularly thanks to Joe and Marion and Michael for doing this, our intrepid panelists. It's always been a thorny subject, but it's perhaps more problematic these days. So I think I told you before, I believe you're all quite courageous for doing this. I'd like to start, kind of begin with a quote from Morton Bartlett. I have to look at my notes and my small writing and see what people might have to say about this. It was something he wrote for like a Harvard, where he went to school, a Harvard alumni kind of update thing. And he said, "My hobby is sculpting in plaster. Its purpose is that of all other hobbies, to let urges that do not find expression in other channels." So I just maybe want you all to riff a little bit on this notion of the urge, which is kind of defined as a pressing want that borders on a compulsion. And maybe, you know, and of course it has a long history in psychology from Freud on, but you know, rather than the transitive verb of me urging you to wear face masks when you go out, but to think about it more in aesthetic terms is also a kind of product of desire and how that comes out. So, well, you know, since I quoted Bartlett to begin with, let's start with you, Marion, and on this notion of
Yes, it's interesting. When I found Bartlett, I had only 2 pieces of research to go on: the 1932 yearbook from Harvard and a 1963 Yankee Magazine article. And the quote you refer to tells me that he wanted people to know this about him. He had already dropped out of Harvard, but he was still in the yearbook. That's how it worked. So it speaks to the fact to me that this passion wasn't secret. It might have been private, but it wasn't secret. And it also lets us know that it was fantasy and it wasn't real. And that's, I mean, I've read this, his bio in the Harvard yearbook quite a few times. And each time that's what speaks to me, the fact that it was fantasy and that he wanted people to know about it. And we can very much speak to the difference between privacy and secrecy.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. Joe, what do you think about this notion of the urge and how it's wrapped up in desire?
Well, certainly, I think, at least in the kind of art that I understand, it's urge driven. And it's often, you know, a way of articulating, you know, things that are beyond words, you know, beyond images, that, you know, something that, you know, you can't quite, you know, tell somebody, but you can make art that somehow, you know, expresses something that you're trying to get out. And then another thing that when I think about when you mention that quote, is that also some of the things that are of most value, and when I say value, I don't mean monetarily, but of most value to, you know, to experience, you know, are sometimes, you know, considered, you know, at least, you know, for a time, either, you know, rubbish or beneath contempt or disgraceful, you know, which sometimes outsider art was, when created, like not treated with any kind of, you know, respect, you know, that it's been treated now with. So, you know, sometimes the things that have the lasting value, that mean the most, come from, you know, the impulse or the itch, you know. And I don't know, that's what I think about when I hear that quote.
Yeah. And Michael, how do you speculate this idea of the urge in terms of Darger's work. Does it hold for you?
I think the urge among many art brut artists, as well as, of course, Darger and Bartlett, I think there is an element of fantasy, as Marion pointed out, but there's also the idea that, particularly among, say, novelists, there's a saying that goes something about that the kernel of most novels, most fiction, is autobiography. So I think that even though there may be fantasy elements in a lot of this work, I don't think we can look at it as completely that. I think that there is a fundamental foundation. In fact, I really think the whole mechanism for art brut is the transformation of trauma. And that's why I think that it's important to look at this work for those who are so inclined, because it really gives us an insight into the subconscious that is really being addressed in this work. And so that's my feelings about it.
That's very interesting, Michael, and I think it corresponds interestingly with what Marion suggested in terms of privacy and secrecy, and so when we're thinking of these private worlds made visible and then often, except in the case of Joe here, discovered usually in a dumpster when the artist is dead. Are we? I mean, and I don't want to put too much psychoanalysis on this, but are we talking about an act of sublimation here? And maybe, Joe might have to, whatever, any of you can come in on that one.
Well, personally, I think that, art is a kind, or there's a therapy aspect in the act of making art, and that's why the taboo is so important, because you can't, like if you go to a therapist, you want to be able to express the darkest things about your life, otherwise why are you even going to the therapist? You have to be able to show and talk about and engage with the very things that you're most afraid of. So if you try to, to censor certain art or claim that it's, inappropriate or sometimes even illegal, the only thing that it manages to do is to push it underground, and then you have what we are talking about in the panel today, maybe outside of art, because it still will have to pop up no matter how hard you try to squash it down, it'll come forth.
I really liked your phrase, Michael. Sorry, I didn't mean, had you finished, Joe? I didn't mean to interrupt. But I really like Michael's phrase, the transformation of trauma. That resonates.
Yeah, and that resonates for Bartlett as well, you think, yes?
Very much.
Very much.
Joe, would you agree that some of the images that you're dealing with is that as well? I mean,
absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's for me, it's a way of dealing with, I don't hide them. I've been, showing them and doing performances. I've been showing my, my private world for some like 45 years. I've been showing my private world, to the public, but it's my, my sanity, my way of, putting some, control over forces inside of me that scare me, and so it's a way of defining, making clear, putting in sharp focus, you know, writing text about it, you know, engaging in all the different elements, you know, that are, you know, seething, you know, under the surface. And then I'm able to then look at it, you know, then I sit back and I look at it, and then I can reflect on things that I couldn't reflect on when they were just, you know, deep inside without a voice.
I think the whole idea of the terms transgressive and taboo are really terms that are fear-based. And it's really the fear of the unknown that these artists are exploring. And I think this is a courageous act. I think we have to bear in mind that except for Joe, you know, with Bartlett and Darger, we have no business looking at this work. This work was private. I mean, these lonely bachelors created this work on their own. They didn't do it for a public, as far as we know. Whereas with Joe, he's taken these images that are very personal to him and stepped up and is showing this work. And sometimes I wonder whether this should even be called art at all in terms of the way, say, academics or mainstream people think of art. I think that's why outsider art brut, self-taught art in many cases is a very unique body of work, unique approach that is not about art. It's about art about the artist and the artist's psyche.
Yeah, I mean, I remember there was one, when I was much younger, there was one art critic that described my work as being pathological. And I hadn't thought about it, but actually I took kind of an affection to it, you know, and I thought, oh, okay. And then, you know, I also, maybe I am a pathologist, you know, and I'm doing an autopsy, you know, and that's what it feels like.
I'm curious, going off of that, Joe, and also what Michael's proposed about this transformative power. I think that even when we're looking at some darker aspects of the psyche here, be it violence or sexuality or things like that, is that it seems to be done with a great deal of love. That really, that if you look at the work of these three artists or many others we could consider, is that it's actually, is that all right to say it's loving? How do you feel about that?
It's more than all right. I think it's so relevant. And it puzzles me after all these years that people still can't see that, certainly in Bartlett's work. They'll see the negativity, they won't see the push and pull, and they won't see the love and the detail. And I mean, to make clothes like this is a loving act. You can't do it unless you really care. I don't know if you find the same thing, Joe, that people will have a knee-jerk reaction.
That's true. That's true, Marion. I do get that, but I think they're so worried, you know, about, you know, confronting these things in themselves that they lose. They get lost in some of the violence. And I mean, every one of these paintings, it might be the darkest soul, you know, that I'm dealing with, but they're precious.
Right.
I mean, every brushstroke is like a caress, you know, on the surface of the painting for me.
Oh my goodness.
Back here, and you know, I put just as much love into, you know, John Brown, you know, or Swift Runner, you know.
And it couldn't turn out the way it does without that love and attention to detail.
And I have such affection for like the you know, the outcast and you know, the loser in life, you know, that doesn't get a chance, you know, to tell their side of the story, and I want to be a voice for them too, you know, to be able to like when I'm doing historical things, I want them to actually tell their side of the story without any,
You're really their voice.
yeah, no judgment at all.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, Joe. I mean, you're also dealing with their, because you're doing portraits of these people. You're also dealing with their love, no matter how afflictive it is. And I remember a long time ago, you sharing with me a letter a cannibal had written to the parents of one of his victims. I'm probably getting this wrong.
Yeah, that was Albert Fish. Yeah, you're
where
talking
he wanted to say that, like, I did not, I treated her properly. I didn't, but I did eat her, but I didn't rape her.
He kept saying through the trial that he did not defile her, as if cutting her up and eating her was not defiling her, but in a way there was a certain rationality to these thoughts that were in him, because he was raised in this kind of Christian ethic that I was also raised in, in which violence was holy, like the martyred saints became holy through horrible beheadings or disembowelings, and obviously Christ was nailed to a cross, but that's what made them holy. But the one thing in my Catholic Church that was like forbidden and somehow like the worst thing was sex. And
I think that reflects the whole cultural attitude. See all kinds of violence on television. There's no problem with that. But if we get too sexual, there's greater fear really around that completely.
Yeah.
So,
well, also about non-normative, sexuality. I mean, I think especially involving children or something. And Michael, I mean, we can say that Darger loved the Vivian girls, right? But anything more is speculation.
Right. He identified with Annie Ehrenberg, the child martyr, who was the kind of the archetypal girl in the realms of the unreal. The Vivian girls came after Annie Ehrenberg, but this portrait of Annie Ehrenberg was really the driving force, because he lost this portrait, couldn't find it, and he had this obsession with finding it, but really it represented the loss of his parents, his sister, his mother, and a few years later, his father at an early age. So he shares this with Bartlett as well, losing his, Marion, you entitled your catalog Family Found. I think that Vivian Girls were Darger's family found. He loved these characters, and as an arrested adolescent, he lived within that world more than in the real world. And
I'm glad he didn't claim the name first.
Say that again.
I'm glad he didn't claim the title first.
Yeah, right.
I agree with you, Michael, with, sometimes you have these characters that represent, certain parts, of yourself too, as, because, the painting of John Brown was, me dealing with my father, and, and the one of, little Mary Bell, it's a little girl, but I identified with her. So it was actually, about my childhood too. So I certainly agree with you that these, are ways, of working out things through these, other beings too, that you're telling their story. And you try, at least I try to be true to their story too, but then I'm also telling my own story at the same time.
But people will interpret it the way they want to see it.
And of course, and that's fine too. And that's actually, that's a good thing, because then the story has new ways of, of speaking, and new, ears to, and eyes to learn. The more that they try, they're only defeating their own experience if they just shut it down. But if they look with their own eyes, and see a new story, that's great. That's beautiful.
Does it still puzzle you, Joe, when people can only see the darkness and they can't see the light that you're trying to tell them about?
Oh yes, I mean it'll puzzle me, but it doesn't really affect me. I mean, you know,
Mm.
I'm puzzled by everything. I mean, the mystery of life. You know, I think the taboo speaks to as well. You know, the fact that you could have in the same being, such contradictions, of, ignorance and wisdom, and cruelty and kindness, you know,
Mhm.
and all of these things, good and evil existing, in the same being at the same time.
That's
People
so
have such
true.
trouble with
Hmm.
And, and,
But
and
it does
all the,
puzzle me when.
like all of
Sorry.
the troubles in the world. It's out there. If we could just fix what's out there, but it's all right here.
and even though
Mhm.
this is really perfect, personal, private work, uh, we are talking a little bit about in the eye of the beholder here. So when people are responding, and I think we can all agree that we live in a particularly prudish, puritanical country in terms of the sexual or erotic content of work, but uh, it does bring up this odd relationship about what happens when private work is brought to the public and its reaction. And I think I'm curious how you people feel about this, but the way that the outsider has taken such a prominent role in culture for so long, the outsider, the outlaw, the outcast, that very marginality seems to centralize them. That maybe within as a hegemonic mean, we need the outside to define what the inside is, or various things like that. I don't know, Michael, you're kind of a scholar. What does that hold for you? Or have we lost Michael
I
briefly?
think we've lost him briefly. We'll
Okay,
try and get him back up, but we'll.
well, maybe Marion, does this make sense to you then, what I was proposing?
I lost you at the scholar part. What did you
Okay.
say
Well,
before
just a kind
that?
of we were talking about the audience and how our culture seems to need this outsider or the outlaw voice or even the outcast of the witch
Definition
or
of them
something like
being
that.
marginalized. Hmm. You, the audience needs them to be marginalized. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, or we
For
need
it,
that margin to define the kind of a healthy body politic of what we are as a society.
I think that's true because people can't relate it to themselves, so they have to remove it from themselves. Although, as Joe was saying, it is actually in all of us, what we're seeing. But in order to accept it, they have to separate it from themselves. I was very surprised one of the first times I showed Bartlett's, people would actually say, I'm sorry, I have to leave the booth. They were really so upset. I think also dolls scare people in a different way. But Darga perhaps comes into that category as well. But I was really shocked at how visceral the response was when people saw Bartlett's. Of course, I can see the push and the pull and the darkness and the light, but a lot of people could only see the darkness, which seems beyond marginalizing. It's the only way they could characterize it, instead of seeing the beauty as well. Look at this example on the screen. Oops, we've just passed it. But it's the same figure as a boy and a girl, both crying. And it shows the extent of the ability to show children's feelings, not hurting children's feelings. It's relating their feelings to us. That's how I see it. But a lot of people can't.
Oh, okay, great. I'm sorry. I was looking at these things. What do you say, Joe, to this? I mean, it seems to me we were talking about the other and the outsider even before we had the term outsider art, because I've known you so long, Joe. I mean,
Yeah,
you've thought about this, I know.
yeah, but I think the I guess I always cared so much, about, the like the lost, like I identified with feeling, alone, and, and not, having had not the best upbringing, that I then, was very interested in the stories that I could relate to, that I would read about. And, and the outsider art world, had a in the beginnings had a connection to, psychoanalysis, which I was also interested in as well, because I was trying to figure myself out. But the outsider is, I think, a part of all of us that is now, people are kind of scared to admit the fact that this is humanity, in all of its glory, and its, in its wisdom, ignorance, as I said before, in every aspect. Because, if the very worst of humanity has no chance of redemption, then does anyone have any chance of redemption? And that doesn't mean that if somebody commits, a terrible crime, they shouldn't be punished. That's not, has nothing to do, that has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the, just, accepting, what we are, and, it's so divisive right now. Like everything is so, this side and that side, everything's cut. But even good and evil cannot, they need each other. They can't exist without each other. And they also are part of what humanity is. And they will always be somehow connected, just as, the darkness leads into the light and the light leads into the darkness. They will fundamentally always be connected.
Yeah.
Are you finding, Joe, that people are more accepting now than 20 years ago?
I would say yes, until recently. Recently it's gotten a bit worse, but it was getting that way. But now it seems that both the left and the right are both getting very puritanical.
Yeah, and I think, Joe, it's just to state the obvious. Of course, we make a big distinction between any acts versus art. To say the obvious,
but sometimes you have to say that, Carlo, because
I know, no, it's true.
Look at
That's why I'm agreeing
they
publicly.
see it as a crime, that the work itself, to portray it is a crime.
But if we're talking about art or other forms of storytelling, like literature, like Conrad's Heart of Darkness, isn't part of the power of this, and maybe the utility of it is an ability to of point of identification. That really what we can learn from this work, which plumbs outside of our normal psychic experiences, is an ability to relate to these impulses or things.
And I think that also relates to, things like the Grunewald, the crucifixion, where he has Christ, as a syphilitic, essentially almost a corpse, crucified. He was showing, that disease, like, the moral paradox, is inherent, in the Christ figure, and humanity itself.
And I believe that's concurrent with the plague, as we are now. So.
But as a counterpoint to what you just said, Joe, I remember when I found Bartlett, it was just when Sally Mann was rising to fame, and she was so criticized for photographing her own children, often with their permission. So how do you balance that with what you just said?
The thing is, it just is,
you can't.
it's inherent, in the very nature, of humanity. It's sewn within the fabric,
Mm.
of our very existence.
And
So you can't make sense of it. It's not a rational thing that's so easy that you can, and you can never protect yourself from disease or it's, we have to, try to come up with, a vaccine and like all, and we have to try to be a better person every day. All those things have nothing to do with what I'm saying. I'm just saying that the very nature of life includes all of these things that are so scary, so frightening, that it's more important to look at them, listen to them,
And this work gives people in your work, gives people the chance to do that. But I remember at the time when I did find Bartlett, how odd it was to have people criticizing dolls that weren't real and criticizing Sally Mann's photographs of her children that were real. They weren't equivalent in any way, but they were given an equivalency at the time.
Well, but I think, Marion, that the equivalency in terms of people's reaction is that we have it's very problematic and it's really difficult for people to recognize sexuality within young children. And that's what, we could say Darger's work as well. It touches upon that. And that is really like one of the most taboo things. You go to a prison, what is the outcast within a prison society, or people with those kind of things? So yes, that's a real eye of the beholder thing. And I mean, it's always been tricky. And now that we have, we're so much more aware of victims in our culture and the sensitivities to people and their traumas and stuff like that, it is exacerbated, as Joe suggests. But I think it begs the point, is this material still so taboo that in many people's eyes? Yeah.
Well, wasn't Balthus also like problematic at one time?
Well, yeah, but it kind of still is, because that's about the gays, and that's sort of like, I mean, Marion, since you brought up Sally Mann and also with the work you work with, is we have a little more trouble with the kind of photo work that accompanies something like Alice in Wonderland, or John Sturgis, because there we are looking at a different kind of gaze, and it does maybe lean a little, even if it's not acted upon, towards something a little more predatory. Is it fair to say?
There's a little story that makes me think of all of this, and it's when Lewis Carroll would walk hand in hand with Alice when I was researching for Bartlett. He would only do so if he was wearing white gloves. That's how you ended up with the White Rabbit. And this distance that you had to keep, it was true love, but it wasn't intrusive love, is how I see it. And these white gloves have always been meaningful for me. And with Bartlett, the separation of real and fantasy, and the fact there were dolls, and his life didn't involve hurting. He worked with children, he did photograph them, but he was very gentle, there was no negativity, we know this. And I like to think of that white glove as a separation, or the white gloves as a separation that helps it all make sense to me. I don't know about anybody else.
I love that story.
No, I think what you're saying
I
is
do too.
really interesting. Because, maybe, like Lewis Carroll, or, who, people that you might think of, in literature too, there was an outlet for someone who may, have had these, horrible things, but then transformed them, into something of beauty, and so was never did anything, immoral, but, was able to transform this darkness that was inside of them into something, that was positive,
Yes. And it was actually
with someone like Darger, you have all this horrific disemboweling of children, which, I mean, certainly most people wouldn't think that this is a transformation into something beautiful. But for Darger, this was a metaphor for him. He identified with all these children. He really felt, I believe, that life, and in fact God, had disemboweled him emotionally, and this was his projection of it. He identified so strongly with these children.
Yeah.
When he became angry at God, this is what happened. He was trying to show his anger and his rage, and yes, it's completely over the top, completely unacceptable in anything in real life. But in terms of his own artwork and his own private world, this was what he had to do to express himself and to show really how traumatized he was and how angry he was.
Right. Is it time to entertain some questions from people? What do you think? Or maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. Why don't you ask?
No, well, if you want to, do you have anything else you want to bring up, Carlo?
Well,
We have a few. I mean, you guys have done a good job of. There have been a few questions coming in, and you really answered them naturally, actually. But
I mean, the elephant in the room is really about how we are talking about this now in this context, where we are stuck in the moment at hand, even if we're dealing also with a historical fact, and we have talked a little bit about the kind of new sensitivities around this material, which are quite right, but it can be difficult. And I don't know if you feel like talking about it, Michael, but I know you had some difficulty with how students related to this work when you were at the Institute of Art in Chicago. I don't know. I mean, without getting into the weeds on that, I think we might talk about what are the new set of problems, not just us, but viewers and anyone who's tuned into this have to contend with as we look at this work now.
Well, I believe that the new social justice paradigm that is emerging now is, I mean, I'm totally behind it, and I believe that just as we're trying to establish more connections with racial minorities, more connections with sexual minorities, that I think in the work in this field, it also has to do with the connection with schizophrenics, spiritual visionaries, eccentric mavericks that have always dominated the art brut field. So really understanding and looking at this work, it would be part and parcel to me of exploring the work of the outsider or the unknown or whatever. My experiences, and if anybody wants to really look at it, get a good look at that, the Journal of Higher Education did a wonderful article on me and my students regarding that whole debacle. I think the only problem occurs is when there is no tolerance. And I think that there is a huge lack of tolerance among some people in the new social warrior movement. And that's, I got into trouble because I was pleading for tolerance and I was told, no, zero tolerance. So, I can understand that point of view. I just don't agree with it. And yeah.
Who told you that, Michael? No tolerance. Who told you no tolerance?
The administration. I wanted to have a mediation between my students and myself. And I was told by the administration that there's no discussion about this. It can't be discussed.
My goodness.
Because LGBTQ spokespeople refused to compromise on anything. It was either my way or the highway. That was what I was told. So that's and I think that's a position that's really, it's too bad. It's a shame for freedom of speech and freedom of intellectual.
That must have been so difficult for you to accept or to hear.
Well, I resigned. That is what happened.
Oh,
they took away my classes. They took away my insurance. The administration would not get behind me. So
know this. Oh my goodness.
All art schools do have also a problem of how much the kids are paying and how easy it is
Yeah.
to throw the faculty under the bus.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was kicked out of art school in the short time that I spent.
Yeah.
All this occurred when Trump was elected in 2016. I think there was such I had students who refused to come to class because they were afraid they were going to get shot in the street because they were gay or they were whatever, transgender. There was just fear was just palpable. So I can only hope that things kind of improve from that.
And
Yeah.
even then, there'll be a lot of residual trauma, as we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Nikki, why don't you see? Are there any interesting questions for the
Yeah,
talk?
let's spend the last 10 minutes or so. I'll just scroll through now. So here's one in relation to outsider artists who are no longer alive. So for Bartlett and Darger specifically, Marion and Michael, do you wonder what they would make? I guess we kind of already touched on this, but do you wonder what they would make of their works being dissected and assimilated within the field of art brut outsider art?
I do.
I do. Yeah. What? I mean, there's no way of knowing, but what do you think?
Well, we have a little bit of a clue because Bartlett wasn't really a hermit, although he has been described as that. And he allowed and actually gave permission and made happen the one publicity that he had in 1963 with Yankee Magazine. That was completely with his approval. So he wanted this to be known. And it was in such a workaday way that it happened. It was actually an engagement gift for his goddaughter, who was getting engaged to a journalist, and he wanted to give them a gift. And the journalist wanted to write about him, and he said yes. So we know that he saw it almost in a matter-of-fact way.
Yeah.
And it's the only real clue we have. And then, of course, he put them all away after that. So that leaves quite a lot of ambivalence.
Right. Another Bartlett question for you, Marion. How is Bartlett's work a quote-unquote transformation of trauma?
Well, I think it's to do with his, perhaps trauma is not the best word, but his own fear of not having a family, and he made it happen. And he says himself in his own bio, and that's how I see it. So he turned the trauma into something positive, which is the ideal way of dealing with it if we can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He
was an
lost his
orphan,
parents
right?
when he was 8 years old. So, I mean, what could be more traumatic than that?
And to make their own family. And we know this is the case from the first-hand information we have from his goddaughter, that he actually carried the photographs with them. So another point I'd like to make is he only made the dolls in order to photograph them. And the photographs then became his reality. And they were very seldom, if ever, photographed unclothed. So there's really a normal subtext to this extreme abnormality that is often the knee-jerk reaction to it. And I think that's part of the beauty, to do all this in such detail, anatomically perfect, to photograph them clothed where nobody sees the perfection, except he knows it's there. But we do know he carried the small photographs with him. And that's such an important part of the story that often isn't referred to.
Right. Let me look through some more here.
Marion, can I just ask you a question? We have seen some images of the girls unclothed that actually Bartlett did, but no images of the unclothed, right?
The boys, no, the boys, people believe the boy was actually his own self-portrait.
Right.
But
is he anatomically correct? I mean, under the
much girls, but 7-year-old boys are a bit fuzzy anyway when they're anatomically correct. So it's sort of hard to tell, but reasonably so. But the three boys were all 7 or 8 years old, and people do believe that this was his self-portrait.
Mm-hmm.
They are at the beach. They're, you know, there's, I don't think it's that different. It's just that girls are a bit more shocking.
Yeah, we have a whole history of pooties and stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, a couple more and then we'll wrap it up. Is there an ableist double standard? Do so-called outsiders like Bartlett and Darger get condemned more readily than mainstream artists with no known mental health issues? Does the suspicion of abuse arise for them more than others? Michael?
Well, I think that's for you, Carlo.
Yeah,
Well,
Carlo. Yeah.
I mean, if I think of the Chapman brothers, probably got as much flack as anyone up here talking now for what they did. I just think there are just areas of sensitivity that, regardless of whether it's an aesthetic or a conceptual or a very personal, private, and maybe even benign reason, the motives, or Sally Mann, as you brought up earlier, the motives don't really matter. We're very much in a society that is, you know, very in touch with its feelings, as child psychologists describe it. They're in touch, and so it's really about how it makes people feel. So I think it's problematic everywhere, but I could be wrong.
Here's a good one. What is the most current form of transgression in outsider art that any of you have seen today?
Oh my, that is a good one. I don't think I know how to answer that. The most current form of transgression in outsider art. Oh, do you have an answer for that, Joe? I don't know if I do.
Not really. I don't necessarily even follow what's contemporary art, let alone outsider art, you know, so I wouldn't know what the latest, you know, thing is being called, because it doesn't really, it's not of my interest, really.
I think I thought of something, and it was at the Photo Brut exhibit that I went to the opening of at the weekend. And it's nothing to do with children or sexuality, but I think it's the most transgressive, not necessarily taboo, thing that I've ever seen, and I could hardly look at it. And it was, I don't remember his name, but it was the man who sewed himself together. So he'd sew his arms to his body, his cheek to his elbow.
Well,
mine,
you know, Carlo McCormick is, you know, Canberra Fowler, also known as the voluptuous horror of Karen Black, did that kind of ritual, you know, in performance art, where she sewed the lips of her sexual organs together as a performance piece. That was
also a film with Richard Kern, I believe.
Yeah, and that at that time was certainly transgressive.
I think it still would be. Never mind that.
Still is. Yeah.
It's hard to track like outsider art as current, because it seems to be more a matter of discovery of private things. So it's hard to talk about it, but we can see how shifts change. You know, how the shifting changes of what we're interested in, and I think it's been really great that a lot of artists of color and kind of globalism set in. But I do think that maybe work that deals with some form of body dysmorphia is resonant right now, and that we're maybe seeing that a little more, when before people, it didn't make as much sense. But I think we've all got pretty difficult relationships with body and ideals and stuff, so maybe we're seeing more of that, but I'm not sure.
Okay. I'll pick one more. There are many. How does outsider artists' work and narratives that are popularized after their death complicate this issue of censorship and social justice?
Michael, I'm curious, because didn't you you kind of did an abridged compendium of Darger's writings, didn't you? So that you really dealt with a narrative there.
Right.
Uh-huh.
I've done an abridgment. It's a 1500. Well, it's a much short. It's an abridgment of his 15,000 page work, and one of my points always with Darger was that a complete understanding of him could never come about unless people read his writings, his Realms of the Unreal. Within that novel, he has descriptions that totally parallel everything he did in his visual art, from the beautiful to the horrific. So yeah, he was intensely involved with a narrative in that. I've been trying for many years to get it published. It looks like it may happen. We don't know. I'm in negotiations, but if that ever comes out, I am hoping that people will be able to have a deeper insight into Darger by really reading what the images are really springing from in his narrative writing. I don't know how that addresses the social paradigm of today, but that will certainly be a challenge to it, I suspect.
Mm-hmm.
And just, I guess, lastly on that, Joe, there is a tremendous narrative element in your work. In a way, you compress so much information within every one of your paintings, and you need a magnifying glass to see them sometimes, that they could come with a book of didactics each, right? So you are thinking about that as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they even, they speak to each other too. And, one painting, continues into the next painting, and there's reoccurring, characters that go from one painting to another, and then have, different things to say when they appear in the next painting, and, my friends and family also, become part of the narrative, just as much as, historical figures. They become just as important, and like in the book of Revelations, my wife and I are writing on the head of the beast, and real, people that, we are bringing up to heaven, and real people we are, destroying in hell. And so we become, part of the narrative, but of course the narrative is coming, from us. And I say us because in a way, my friends and family and my influence are all, riding this, journey together. So it's actually, I'm like a filter of all this information that then I put onto the surface and express this long narrative that's been going on for centuries.
Joe, do you still consider yourself a medieval painter in the modern Dark Ages?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly identify, more strongly, with, the pre-industrial period too, because I don't really need any kind of technology to make any of my art, whether it's performance art or as a painter. I'm perfectly fine, in the pre-industrial era, and, I somehow managed to actually exist in this era too. Whitney, get online.
Here you are. Yeah.
Yeah, here I am.
Yeah.
It's great.
That is great. One
Great.
more. It's 3:00. It's over, but we'll do one more. What the heck? How does taboo material tend to have different meaning when it emerges from outsiders versus mainstream artists? In what ways and why? Anyone?
Well, I mean, I think that the taboo is what defines the outsider to some degree. I mean, I think Freud made some remarks about how despite our social conditions and our ideas, that how disgusting would we seem to cannibals, right? That what, you eat lettuce or something like that. I mean, I think it's inherent to there, but maybe people have a better idea than I do. What do you think, Michael, on that?
Well, I agree. I mean, I think that in the art brut world, that this is almost natural. I mean, it's
Right.
not unexpected when it occurs, when you have a piss Christ or something more contemporary in the mainstream. I think it's more shocking just because mainstream is a much bigger world, much bigger art world, I think, and there's so many other things going on in the mainstream that it jumps out at us more. Whereas I think in this world, although one can go from in this outsider world is a huge range. We can go from, bottle cap bunnies to Henry Darger, so you have the cuteness, you have the naive charm, you have all this nice stuff, but then you also have this, whole world of artists bearing their psyches, bearing their souls, which is always a little bit difficult. So I think the mainstream world definitely there's going to be a bigger reaction just because it's not as expected,
Yep. Okay. Do any of you guys have any final things you want to discuss, talk about? I think this has been great. Carlo?
I just want to say thanks to
closing
everyone.
remarks?
It was really fun to talk to you. I hope it was entertaining to other people, but I got a lot out of it. So I want to thank you all for sharing.
Yeah.
Thank you all for joining us. It was a lovely group of people, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was
happy to
that
see
was
old
great.
friends again.
Uh-huh.
Even though we can't be in person these days, but it's nice to be able to hear your voices and see you. I mean, it's a tough time, but it's good to have something like this.
Yeah. No, it's been wonderful. Thank you, all of you, for joining us. And if you're out there, we didn't get to all the questions. There were many. So this talk will be live on the Outsider Art Fair website. Not live, it'll be archived on the Outsider Art Fair website in the coming days. So you can also always go back to that. And yeah, check out the Outsider Art Fair. We're online and in person. We're running until February 7, Sunday, February 7. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Marion. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Carlo.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.